The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. On April 28th, Mark Carney won enough seats to claim victory and form government. He's 3 seats short of an outright majority government in a parliament that won't defeat him. There is no coalition that will rise up and pass a motion of non-confidence. He seized the moment. He immediately went to work as a prime minister with confidence that he could rule with authority. And he has done so. Much to the surprise of many, he quickly cherry-picked the Conservative Party's platform, incorporated it with his vision, and went to work. Don Stickney, the founder of Playbook, was in Ottawa recently and wrote, "I went in assuming the usual political conversations and measured optimism. Instead, I found myself connecting with Canadians from across the country who were genuinely energized about what is happening right now. Premiers collaborating across party lines, federal leadership stepping up on a focused economic strategy, and nearly universal support for increased defense spending." Stickney says 6 months ago, "I would never have predicted any of these outcomes. The political landscape felt fragmented. The economic challenges were overwhelming and consensus on major issues seemed impossible." I invited Don Stickney to join me for a conversation that matters about the unexpected mindset and action changes he witnessed on Parliament Hill. Don, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You know, when I saw your post, I went, okay, hang on a second. I think that you're reading something that I was starting to get a feeling about, that the Prime Minister is actually making the needle move, and he's only been there for 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's really surprising. I've been around government politics, private sector, kind of that interface my entire life. I've never seen anything like this. So, and certainly, wasn't picking up on that locally, but spending some time in Ottawa recently really came to realize how much how much optimism there is, just in terms of new MPs, the public service. I've never seen the public service as positive and open to ideas as they are right now. And the Prime Minister's brought a very focused agenda in terms of what his priorities are. And I think his cabinet and Canadians understand the moment we're living in right now and what the consequences of not following through with a strong focused strategy are.
As you had written, you didn't expect that. Like, how quickly did it dawn on you that this was an entirely different environment?
Really, I mean, it was moments after getting off the plane, just talking to people. A lot of my circle, obviously, I engage with here is very local, and the perspective there tends to be one not nearly as optimistic, but yeah, it certainly was struck by the conversations I was having and continued throughout the evening and then into the next day. And sitting down with government and each conversation, it became very apparent to me that people were feeling good about the economy, people were feeling good about the direction of the country, and that they saw a place for themselves in that strategy, and that we were kind of coming out of this malaise that we had been in, which I think, obviously there was a pretty shocking turning point with the US election. And the events that followed that most Canadians probably would not have contemplated in their lifetime. I know certainly I didn't expect anything near that dramatic in terms of where the relationship shifted, but it seems like people are feeling confident that things are getting back on track. And we're also opening up new relationships globally where there just hasn't been that focus previously.
Well, let's come back to some of those points, but I'm somewhat fascinated by Mr. Carney's rise up through the polls, because when he took over the leadership from Prime Minister Trudeau, he was sort of seen almost to be neck and neck with Pierre Poilievre. you take a look at, and of course, come election day, he had a better result. But today, I checked the polls this morning, and he's literally at 50%. This is almost unheard of.
Yeah, and I've seen approval ratings in the 70s, which obviously cuts across many partisan lines when you're seeing that level of support. I think political support for the party itself has risen considerably since the election, but approval ratings for the prime minister are even higher. So clearly he's endeared himself to a lot of Canadians across many political lines. He's not a politician. He's certainly not a career politician. His background is more in finance and banking and serving in these global economic roles. And I think it's fair to say, Canadians can ask for someone with a better resume or set of experiences for the current circumstances we're in.
I don't want to sound like I'm singing his praises too loudly, because I was very skeptical going into this election. I did not think that the Liberals would survive at all. And yet to see him take control the way that he has, I find myself thinking, okay, you are acting prime ministerial. You're my vision of the kind of reasoned thinking that you want to have at the helm. Are you finding that as well?
Yeah, I think that's fair. He doesn't have the political baggage or the attachment to the Liberal Party that, a lot of other leadership candidates would have had, being affiliated with the previous government. But generally, his exposure to politics has been pretty limited. So he brings this more of a business background, more of an international relationships background, and someone with a deep network that clearly has a lot of respect. And I think that's even true in the context of the relationships with the Americans, which is something obviously that's become a pretty critical piece. But we're also now, I don't know if you've followed the news cycle in the last 24 hours, we've ratified a deal with the EU on trade that has been outstanding, that's tied to commitments we've made to NATO, which is going to enable us to do a lot of development in terms of critical minerals in Canada, which is one of our key resources. And I think it's pretty clear he's got a strategy here, and it's one that certainly is expansive beyond the boundaries of Canada and is really looking at what Canada can do globally.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. When I was first looking at him entering this role, I thought that he was ideologically aligned quite closely with the Trudeau government's policies on energy, the environment, and so on. But he seems to have maybe said, well, in the moment, Canada has other priorities that we need to focus in on.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Certainly, all Canadians, I expect, are feeling that way. So we've seen some pretty immediate action out of Parliament with Bill C5, Major Projects Bill. We've seen something comparable out of Victoria here, albeit on a smaller scale. I think politicians are reading the room and understand that Canadians need to go to work, the economy needs to improve, and ultimately we need to take care of our energy security, we need to diversify our trade, we need to create and extract commodities that other countries want and not be beholden to a single trading partner.
So those natural resources are our quickest and easiest path to bolstering the Canadian economy.
Yeah, Canada's got a long history of extracting resources out of the ground and selling them to other countries. That strategy is one pillar. I think that what we'll see out of this government is a second pillar around the upgrading of those materials, and then the trade diversification in terms of the export of those materials. And I don't think that necessarily removes, clean energy or other projects that look at carbon mitigation from the equation. But the reality is you need a lot of energy to pursue those types of projects. We need critical minerals to build a lot of those sustainable projects that people want to see. I think that we're an economy that's in transition. we're going from purely extraction to now upgrading, and ultimately that should lead us to the third pillar of that strategy, which is creating strong Canadian companies that are building globally relevant solutions. And I don't think that that's necessarily constrained to the resource sector. There are lots of services and products that Canadians can create and build that can be sold around the world. We just haven't done a very good job of that in the last 30 years. We've really ceded that space to others, and I think the Prime Minister understands that, and that's what his government is going to focus on doing.
For us to be able to take a real global presence in the critical minerals space, we have to move beyond just the extraction. We have to do something that we haven't really done in the past, is we have to become processors. We don't have the scope to be able to do this on our own. It would have to be with the Americans. Do you believe that Mr. Carney has already started to find that deft touch of dealing with President Trump?
I mean, it certainly looks so. Like, I can't point to a better world leader in terms of their management of the president. I think the president of the United States has a lot of respect for Mark Carney, and I think that's because of his background, his financial acumen. I suspect they travel in some similar circles at times and have some similar friends. Now, they couldn't be more different politicians, but a smart politician, which Mr. Carney appears to be, is going to be able to figure out how to manage those types of personalities, see the win in it for his country, but also deliver a win for the President of the United States. And we've seen a shift in tone from the president, and a commitment, albeit not a binding one, but to get a new trade deal done here in the next 30 days or over the course of this summer. I don't think most Canadians thought that would be possible 3 months ago. So that's a real positive sign. And at the same time, it's not like he's ignoring the rest of the world. He's spending a lot of time in Europe this week. He's working with NATO. He's working with other European nations on ratifying trade deals. He's clearly got a very big agenda and is moving quickly.
So to come back to the relationship with Trump a little bit, I've heard in the last week that the tone is Canada is in a better position to work out new trading relationship with the United States than any of the other countries that President Trump has targeted. This has to be the shift at the top. It's got to be the Prime Minister's work that is making this happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think also Donald Trump has created a number of other circumstances around the world that perhaps have become more pressing than the relationship with Canada, and he's seen Canada in a new light as an ally under new leadership. There's a lot of shared priorities. There's shared priorities around defense, around border. Canada has also stepped up in a major way on a number of policy files that the U.S. government has highlighted should be priorities for Canada to act on. And frankly, their response has been stronger than what the president was calling for.
So let's get to that in a moment. But what I think is sort of foundational about the Prime Minister being able to get to that place, to be able to say, yes, we're going to bolster our northern defenses. Yes, we're going to work on border security. Yes, we're going to increase our commitment to NATO, is that there's been a shift in mindset in Canada. And I think it's in large part due to the rhetoric of President Trump.
I think that's fair. I think the majority of Canadians feel very different about that relationship, and that's something that feels like it's not a short-term shift. I think that's woken a lot of Canadians up to the reality of we need to do certain things as a country, we need to do certain things as an economy, and maybe some of those things are going to make us uncomfortable, but that's probably okay. That's probably what's required, because the alternative, and it was certainly hypothetical the way it was painted to us. I think the alternative to a lot of Canadians was seen as a very, very different direction than they wanted to see the country go in.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. I want to touch on one thing that you said a little bit earlier, that you can see that the inner workings of government, that there's a mindset change. And I was just reading this morning that the Prime Minister is expecting the bureaucratic team to show up dressed professionally, act professionally, be on the job and deliver results. This is a tone change as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've never dealt with the more customer service oriented civil service than the exposure I got in Ottawa. Usually it's challenging at the best of times to get an audience, to have an understanding of kind of the direction that side of the government wants to work. Typically you're managing the political side of the government and the civil service, and you're trying to do that in a respectful way. But at times it's not coordinated. At times it's very disjointed. You're moving one side and then you're having to take two steps back with the other and kind of restart and reset. I think the civil service, and change starts right at the top. Obviously, the Prime Minister has recruited Michael Sabia, who's one of the most well-respected civil servants in the history of this country, to lead his government. Everyone takes notice, and I think that they expect major changes to take place, and that they're even open to reimagining what the public service looks like, how it delivers more value for Canadians, ultimately where they can reduce some of their spending. I mean, we're going to spend a lot more money on defense as a country, clearly now. So where are we going to be able to reduce costs but not reduce services to citizens? That's going to be a key challenge. And I think that the public service is really seized with that question.
Well, part of it is to increase revenue. And thus going back to natural resources. How much of a focus do you think will be on, let's go back to our earlier question on that resource development. It was suggested to me that that there's probably going to be a redoubling of the Trans Mountain pipeline. The government already owns it.
Yep.
There's an extraordinary natural resource that resides in Alberta that needs to get to the coast. Could projects of that magnitude be in the works?
Well,
and how important are they to drive economic growth?
Yeah, I would expect everything is on the table. The conditions around that pipeline obviously are very familiar to British Columbians. They're very recent. The 20 of that pipeline just finished in the last year and a half. That's been one of the major economic drivers in this country for since it's been brought online. I think people understand that those projects are necessary. I don't know that it's just limited to oil. I think we'll see more LNG projects. I think we'll see transmission projects. I think we'll see small nuclear reactor projects. I think we'll see certainly infrastructure, particularly on the data center side around AI and the push around Canadian data sovereignty. I think that we'll see a lot of projects to advance with Indigenous equity participation, and those tend to be on the resource side. And then obviously we've touched on critical minerals. We're going to see a lot of mining projects. I mean, that we have a lot of commodities that are very valuable, and in some cases the only other jurisdiction with those commodities is China. And we have a relationship that is very unique with a lot of trading partners that don't want to deal with China.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. We weren't inside the minds of Premier David Eby, but 2 weeks ago I saw him being quoted as no new pipelines into British Columbia. Last week that stance seems to have fallen away. There's talk about dredging in the Burrard Inlet to allow for larger tankers to come in and out. What is it about Mark Carney that he's been able to move to that point? Because we had former Premier John Horgan, who said he was going to use every tool in the toolbox to stop Trans Mountain, and it slowed it down, drove up costs, sure. And now we're seeing this coming together of almost brotherly love, rallying around these natural resources projects that 10 years ago would have been absolute political suicide?
Yeah, I think, everyone is alive to the situation right now that we're in as an economy, as a country. I think premiers are thinking in the context of the Federation, not just their own provinces. I also think that Carney is providing a vision that they can get behind. That being said, it's very difficult to advance, especially in this province, to advance resource projects. And Premier Eby's in a challenging spot. But I think, to your point earlier about Prime Minister Carney, Premier Eby is attempting to act well beyond his partisan alignment and do what's in the best interests of the country, but also British Columbians. So I certainly commend him for that.
So Bill C5 and then Bill 1415 in BC, Bill 5 in Ontario, they all seem to be aligned under the same desire to move projects forward as quickly as is practical and environmentally safe. But the First Nations, Assembly of First Nations, and Union BC Indian Chiefs, and others have expressed concerns, and both Premier Eby and Prime Minister Carney have said, okay, maybe we could have handled that better. Sure. Do you believe that that could become an impediment and that we could wind up getting bogged down? Or do you, in sort of the nature of the theme of what we're talking about today, will we work that out as well in a manner that says we're not trampling on Indigenous rights?
Well, I certainly think in the context of British Columbia, we have a pretty good track record when it comes to reconciliation, equity, participation in projects for Indigenous communities. I think it's a model that the rest of Canada could look at and adapt. And I also think that in the context of all these nation-building projects, whether it's the further expansion of Trans Mountain, those are all things where I think Indigenous communities are going to want a seat at the table, and they deserve to have a seat at the table. And I think that they're going to understand by participating in those dialogues and being at that table, the urgency and the context and what these projects need to get built.
He's got a certain window to demonstrate that he can get things done. How tight do you think that time frame is before people start to say, okay, we actually have to see the results?
In the context of the Prime Minister, I think he's still very much on his honeymoon, his political honeymoon, as people like to call them. I think people are going to be looking for some early signals this fall in terms of tactically what's behind the bigger strategy that we've seen so far, these kind of key points. But I would not expect we're going to find ourselves in a federal election anytime soon. There are a lot of things, working in the government's favor. Certainly the popularity of Prime Minister Carney, but the popularity of the Ontario Premier as well is a key challenge for the opposition. Obviously, the opposition leader has to undergo his own leadership review. And generally, Donald Trump's not going anywhere. So we've got to focus more on getting things done than having elections to shuffle the deck. I think Canadians made a pretty clear choice. They seem to be reaffirming that with their early report card on this government and Prime Minister Carney, and I suspect he'll get considerable runway as a result.
Well, I am pleasantly surprised and pleased to see the direction that we're moving in. As I stated, I wasn't expecting it. And let's hope, for the sake of all of us, that we can see a return to optimism economically and as a nation under his leadership.
There's a lot of opportunity in this country, and I would encourage us to not just look at the resource sector. I think that there's a lot we can do as a country on the technology side. We're very early in the race for AI. I think that the US and China and certainly the Middle East to some extent as well have been faster movers and have allocated more money, but this government's sending all the right signals. They've appointed a minister with responsibility for that. They've come out with a clear strategy around what they want to see in that space. Canada is the originator of the technology. Not a lot of people know that. It was actually invented at the University of Toronto. I think there are a lot of great technology leaders in this country, and if we can put the private and the public sector together, particularly in that space, I think we're talking about a very different economy a decade from now. Canada will have built very relevant global technology companies, and people will be buying those services from Canadians, which is not something we can really point to today.
I hope you're right. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.